I'd like to introduce our speakers, and let me start with Prof Bonang Mohale. Prof Mohale has to leave us. He's actually on a flight today, and he's going to be leaving us and just be on sound for the second half of our event. But he is our V20 Sherpa. This means that he represents the Values 20 when engaging with the G20 on matters of values in public policy. He is also Chancellor of the University of the Free State, Professor of Practice at the Johannesburg Business School, Chairman of both the Bidvest Group Limited and SBV Services, and is a member of the Community of Chairmen in the World Economic Forum. Welcome, Bonang. We also have Dr. Sizwe Nxasana. Dr. Sizwe is our V20 Shepherd. And as a V20 Shepherd, alongside other shepherds, which include Thuli Madamzela and Futhi Matopa, he guides the V20 initiative. And Sizwe founded the first Black-owned audit practice in KwaZulu-Natal in 1989. And today he is transforming education in South Africa as founder of the Sifiso Learning Group, besides chairing several influential foundations and trusts and receiving honorary doctorates from several universities. So thank you very much for joining us today. And the last person in terms of the Values 20, an executive role, really is the co-chair, and that's Dr. Priya Daya. And Priya is also, she's a champion of inclusive value-based leadership and human-centered change. Also part of the V20 in a more, can I say, a more on-the-ground level, and is Alex Matoli. And Alex is really the energy behind our webinar today and has arranged everything and will be facilitating and moderating our discussion. Alex is a conduct and regulatory risk expert and founder of Justings Advisory. She spent over 2 decades in executive roles at companies such as FirstRand, Tiger Brands, and Siemens. And she has a long CV, so please, all of these speakers from the V20, go and have a look at their profiles. Their links are available on our event page. And finally, our founder and our creator of the Good Governance Academy, let me invite Professor Mervyn King to join us today. And Professor King, of course, brings through the governance and ethical and effective leadership around organizations, but also accountability for sustainability. So let me not take up more time, because we do need Professor Bonang on the plane in another couple of minutes. So Alex, over to you. Thank you.
Thank you, Carolyn. It is really such a pleasure to be on this platform with these amazing leaders. And as we go on to have this conversation around values-led leadership and ethical governance, we reflect on it at a time where the world is going through amazing changes. Traditional norms and values that have held the world are actually being challenged. The ways of thinking, the ways of things that we've taken as accepted ways of doing business. Accepted models of collaboration, coordination, and cooperation across the world, they're being challenged. And so this is just the perfect time to have this conversation around what type of values do we need in order to shape a future that leaves no one behind. The Values 20 initiative is really around how do we get values infused into policy decisions and into the way in which we talk about sustainable development. So to kickstart our conversation, I'm just going to ask Professor Bonang Mohale to share with us his perspective, his thinking around values-led leadership, and importantly around the role that ethical governance should be playing in the world as we move forward.
Especially because ethics is what one does when no one is watching. The collaborative activity of the V20, especially during the presidency of South Africa, is organized in no less than 3 task forces. It reflects the 3 themes of solidarity, of sustainable development, and equality. But it does so with a very deliberate effort to understand the interconnected nature of these topics, to offer the broader G20 stakeholders a contextual, a nuanced, and focused range of actions that can be taken to be clearly values-driven in policy development. I think we are also ably guided by a highly committed and extremely talented team of Sherpas, and some of them are joining me today, a select group of senior leaders who will provide strategic counsel, they provide thought leadership, they provide advocacy, and support the broader initiative. So to ensure that this work is impactful, it's relevant, and it's grounded in ethical leadership, whilst rising to the challenge of shaping a much better, more just world. So for me, really, I feel haunted by the words of Dr. Martin Luther King Jr. when he expresses himself around this topic of values. And these are relevant for me today than at any other time in our lives. It is the fact that we are more prone to judge success by the index of our salaries or the size of our cars, rather than by the quality of our service and relationships to humanity in general. Because where there is no hope in the future, there is no power in the present. Similarly, the values of a country are not to be measured by its constitution, but by its budget, because that's where the rubber hits the road. There is no power in the present than the one that can be expressed in rands and cents, especially because developed countries are not those where the poor can afford cars, but where the rich opt to use public transport. So for me, values are ideals, they are beliefs, they are overall conceptions that a group or an individual holds in high regard. These are normally raised and tend to be beliefs that inform what we think of as right or wrong, because they are the values of their particular culture. They are also critical in building a cohesive society as one that works towards the well-being of all in society, fights all forms of exclusion and all forms of marginalization. But they also create a sense of belonging, they promote trust, and they offer the people an opportunity of upward mobility. So you can't talk of values when people feel that they are indeed downtrodden. But at the heart of social cohesion is the notion that relationships among members and groups in society are sufficiently good, and that all feel a sense of belonging, that they perceive the whole society as greater than the parts, and when differences develop, they can be dealt with peacefully. And in socially cohesive societies, there's generally an absence of latent social conflict. For example, conflict based on wealth, ethnicity, on race and gender. But also there's a presence of strong social bonds. For example, civic society, responsive democracy, and even impartial law enforcement. For me, it involves building shared values and communities of interpretation, reducing disparities in wealth and income, but generally enabling people to have a sense that they are engaged in a common enterprise, facing shared challenges, and that they are members of the same community. Thus, for me, social cohesion drives long-term prosperity and competitiveness, because cohesive societies are politically stable and focus on economic growth. It allows everybody in society to share equitably in its prosperity. Let me close by saying, for me, values are like a lighthouse, the North Star. They are not fair weather. This is what you use, especially at the most difficult of times, when you take decisions that are not necessarily easy. These are the ones that compel one to say, if I've got a member of my team who contributes 60% of profits of the entity, but they don't leave the values, that's the one that I fire, just to send a strong strategic message that values are not just what is written on the boards in our reception areas, but they live in the hearts and in the psyche of our people.
Thank you so much, Professor Bonang. You've said some very powerful things about values, but here is something. Many see values as nebulous. They see them as this concept that's very far. And when people and decision makers are pressed with challenging issues, there's a sense that at times expedience takes precedence over integrity. And that, in the face of challenges, leaders at times choose expediency over doing what is right. And the question really is, how do we separate genuine values from well-packaged performance or ethics washing? People say organizations all say we're ethical, but yet when you look at some of the corporate scandal, when you look at some of the political issues that are emerging, people are saying, but where do these things play? So the question, how do we separate genuine values from well-packaged performance and ethics washing?
I think the religions that get this right is Islam and Judaism, because to them it's not only on Sundays, it's a way of life. Therefore, South Africans must integrate values like dignity, ubuntu, and equity into their daily lives by regularly practicing random acts of kindness and senseless acts of beauty. Precisely because the most beautiful soul is the one who survives the fire and comes back with water to help those still struggling within it. So conscience is our connection to true worth and to the principles that make peace a quality of life possible. Family, as only one of the four core values, together with honesty, integrity, and respect, is the most important value in life because it provides a sense of belonging and security. So having a loving, kind, supportive, and considerate family to tend to helps to anchor us and bring stability, joy, and comfort. So for me, these values are crucial for any interaction and for creating a connection with the outside world. So we must continue to be the infinite hope of slaves who never stop believing in the beauty of their dreams, peace-seeking people, desperate for a better future. All of us must urge business not only to fully comply with all laws, but to be a good corporate citizen, an active participant who exercises good cooperative governance in finding common ground, common purpose, and greater good by, amongst others, rooting out and defeating state capture as we, together with our social partners, embark on state building and social cohesion. What our country needs more than anything is conscientious, patriotic business and ethical leadership. So business no longer really has a choice about publicly declaring the values that are near and dear to us, that we adhere to, and about making a vocal stand about these. It is now expected of business. So South Africa believes that business now bears equal responsibility with all our other social partners to drive positive social change.
Thank you so much, Professor Bonang Mohale. I mean, we go to Professor King. You have been a global champion of ethical governance. But as I indicated earlier, we're now living in this time where traditional paradigms around ethical governance and leadership are being challenged. There are some that are saying that the current governance arrangements slow down decisions. They say, they promote anti-competitiveness. So I'm interested in what are your thoughts, as the world is going through this change and these traditional paradigms that we've understood about leadership and ethical governance are being challenged. What are your thoughts? And how do you think leaders can still have ethical decision-making even at a time as this?
Well, thank you for that introduction. I don't agree with the consequences which you've outlined of thinking on an ethical basis and thinking of value creation instead of the primacy of the shareholder, for example. there are facts which were in existence during the 20th century and which exist in the 21st century. And these are they. That first of all, business is at the junction of the economy, society, and the environment. You cannot divorce those three elements from business. President Trump can say DEI is avoided, but that doesn't make it disappear. The other critical thing is that during the 20th century, we had the primacy of the shareholder. And the belief was that the shareholder was the owner of the company. Well, work I did with the late Professor Lynn Stout at Cornell University and at Harvard, what we showed was that the shareholder had none of the attributes of ownership. So, Alex, if you and I were shareholders in a company, you and I can't go into the company and remove a pen from the company. It's a theft.
Absolutely.
We can't break the pen, we can't use it, we can't burn it. But if you own a pen and I own a pen, we can do all those things with the pen. These are the attributes of ownership. So a shareholder is not the owner, and that debunked that myth. But at the same time, the question of the primacy of the shareholder and success being measured by three criteria: increased share price, increased dividends, and increased profit, when at the same time during the 20th century, this was being subsidized by society and the environment, and we could see it in regard to the environment because planet Earth was being degraded. So it actually required a change of mindset to move from that primacy of one particular stakeholder to go back to basics. And that was that in the middle of the 19th century, wealthy families stopped giving money, working capital, to create new businesses, because doing so, they were the owners of the business. And when the company failed, when the business failed, they were still liable to creditors and to employees, etc. And they said openly that they weren't going to provide capital anymore. Well, the government of the day, the representative of the people in the United Kingdom, said, we have to have this working capital. We have to create more jobs. So the intellectuals of the day thought of, why don't we create a legal fiction of a person that has limited liability? In other words, you can subscribe for a slice of the cake of the company, and that goes into the coffers of the company, and that becomes its working capital. If something goes wrong and the business fails, you, the shareholder, have no more liability. It's the company that has the responsibility to the creditors, etc., etc. So that's a fact, and that cannot be changed by anybody, including President Trump. So the company is this legal fiction, and as such, it has no heart, no mind, and no conscience. The governance architecture dictates that the shareholders should appoint people called the directors to steer the business of the company to achieve whatever goals are decided by the board. In doing so, they need to do so with effectiveness, efficiency, and integrity. And they need to create value. What kind of value? Value which is sustainable value. Because it's no good creating value which is having a negative impact on society and or the environment, because you could actually be destroying value. So you need that outcome of what you're doing as an effective leader to create value in a sustainable manner. Then you've got to make sure that you have adequate and efficient internal audit and company secretarial services. In automotive terms, I describe that as the oil that permits the engine to run smoothly. And then you've got effective leadership. That means, Alex, you and I as directors accept we are the heart, mind, and conscience of the company. When something goes wrong, the company, the Rotha Society, should not turn against the company, because by definition, it cannot have an intent to commit a wrong. But when something goes wrong, it's you and I who have actually been the mind, the soul, the heart, and the conscience of the company and made those decisions. So the Rotha Society should turn against us. So value creation, the preservation of value, or the erosion of value, all those three things must be watched carefully by the effective leader. But if you were appointed a guardian of a 5-year-old child who becomes incapacitated of mind because of a motor car accident, you wouldn't think of appropriating for your own profit something from that child's estate. You would act honestly in the best long-term interest of that child. The same thing as directors are actually guardians of the company's assets and its business affairs. And as a guardian, you have to act in the long-term best interest of the health of the company. And if you get that right, you are going to have times of trade-offs between the various stakeholders, but in long term, you get this longevity of success and value creation by the company, which is in the long-term best interest of all the stakeholders, which includes society. So you have to report, and you report to the company, because the company is in fact the person of whom you are the guardian as a director. You report to the company, and through the company to all the stakeholders, not to just the shareholders. If you think about it, the shareholder, generally speaking, you look at stock exchanges around the world, more than 80% of the shareholders are not the initial subscribers when the initial public offering is made. They are secondary market or third market shareholders. So if Sizwe and Carolyn are the initial subscribers, they subscribe for the offering, and the money goes into the coffers of the company. When Carolyn and Sizwe decide to sell their shares, and you and I, Alex, buy those shares, we pay Carolyn and Sizwe. Not a penny goes into the company. You and I haven't put a penny in the company. And yet we're still described by many as providers of capital. We are not. Companies today, in essence, capital is run by way of borrowings, debt, and not equity. So there are facts which cannot change, and the consequences, you say, of the collective mind of a board thinking, of making business judgment call, but thinking through those three prisms of the economy, society, and the environment, slows down decision-making, etc., is not the case. It is a case of making decisions for the best long-term interests of the company, which is in the long-term best interests of society and all its stakeholders. Thank you.
Thank you so much, Professor King. I couldn't agree with you, I mean, such powerful insights. Effective leaders create value. I like the analogy of the guardian, where it talks about the guardian must act in the best interest of the child, of the institution, where you're looking to have value creation, the conversation around hearts, minds, and conscience of the company. That's what directors are. But I'm going to just switch to Dr. Nxasana here. Professor King it's kind of talked about using this analogy of being guardians. It's Youth Month in South Africa. And when you speak to many young people, there is a sense of disconnect between the expectations of the youth and leadership actions. Young people are seeing a form of disjoint, particularly when it comes to ethical leadership, accountability, and sustainable development. Why do you think that is? And how can we bridge this gap and ensure that leaders see themselves as guardians and custodians, and that the outcomes deliver for future generations?
Well, a lot of it has to do with the lived experience of young people, not just in South Africa, lived experience of young people all over the world, actually, particularly in those areas where inequality is still rife, where lack of inclusivity is the order of the day, where young people are the ones mostly impacted by conflict. If you just take the conflict zones in the world today, and you look at who's really severely impacted, whether it is in the Congo or South Sudan, or what's happened with climate change in our own country in South Africa. We've seen what's actually unfolding in the Eastern Cape as an example. The destruction of schools, the death of young people, the displacement of young people, the unemployment and poverty that young people face all over the world. So you have a situation on the one hand where you just take South Africa as an example. You know, we have a constitutional democracy which is based on respecting human rights, the rights of human dignity, of equality, of inclusivity. But the reality on the ground is that even our curriculum, if you just take the South African curriculum as an example, is founded on the principles of democratic principles in South Africa. The reality on the ground, though, is very, very different. You just need to go to a lot of the schools in the country and you realize the conditions under which young people learn, are expected to learn, overcrowded classrooms, lack of resources, difficulties that young people experience every day. It makes it very difficult for young people to believe what they are taught because, for instance, in our own South African curriculum, there's a subject called life orientation, and part of that in the curriculum includes educating young people about citizenship. What is citizenship? What is good citizenship? But when you then teach young people about good citizenship under conditions of squalor, conditions of inequality, and things that they see every day, that obviously is going to lead to a disconnect. And we're not the only ones. You know, many countries in the world have similar issues, similar situations. So this disconnect really does require us, especially leaders of society, whether they're in government, in business, in civil society, to address these issues, to address the issue of inclusivity, of inequality, of making sure that we walk the talk as leaders of society. Because unless we do that, we can teach young people until we are blue in the face. But it's not what we do. It's not what we say. It's what we do that really, really matters, which leads to this disconnect. So it's an important issue that has to be addressed. You know, if you go to countries that practice more social democratic principles, as an example, I mean, Scandinavian countries are a case in point, maybe in this case, you're going to find a lot of young people who may come from displaced countries, from areas of conflict, you know, this southern Sudan or Sudan, from Gaza, come from what's happening now in Iran, come from Ukraine. And often, you know, those young people, even in those countries that practice more social democratic principles, you find that, you know, there are elements of inequality, how young people are treated in those countries. So I'm just saying it's an issue that the whole world needs to pay attention to. And social media also plays a very important role in this disconnect because, you know, we know social media, you know, affects all of our lives and particularly a lot of young people all over the place. So what they see and what they read in social media very often leads to this amplification of the disconnect between what people are saying and what people see and what people follow on social media. So that's one of the issues that is really important as part of the education system, to educate young people about what is right and wrong, but also what to believe and not to believe. And this is becoming even more complicated now in the advent of artificial intelligence, because those people who are creating misinformation, lies, situations that do not bear reality in terms of how people live, are now amplified because of artificial intelligence. So teaching young people about digital citizenship also becomes really, really important because very often you find that it's not so much, even in society, what parents say or what schools or teachers say. It's what young people are exposed to every day that forms opinions in their heads, and they model their lives around those things. So the world is becoming a lot more complicated, is the point I'm making, that, there's a disconnect between what we say, what we teach, versus the lived reality of young people, which causes this disconnect.
Thank you so much. I mean, the point around, young people need to be taught, but the point around meddling is I think it aligns with a comment that I saw, because many young people are saying they are actually yearning to see values being lived. And many young people in society and parts of our society that feels left behind are saying, the concepts are there. Theoretically, it's all on boards and on strategy papers and in policy documents. But, the point around living values, I think it talks to what, Sizwe, you are talking about around modeling those values to young people. And maybe let me just turn back to Professor King on what Dr. Nxasana was talking around. Many boards feel, if you come to institutions, if I go back, there was a survey poll that was showing not too long ago, which shows that many people say we need a lot of ethical governance and change in the public sector, which is really, really true. But there is a role that also the private sector can play, and just broadly institutions can play in modeling the right behavior to the point that Sizwe has made. But many directors, or some directors, would say, Professor King, that, in navigating a fiduciary duty towards an institution, with the needs of having a fair and just society is very difficult to juggle these two worlds. What advice would you give to leaders in institutions who think that it's very difficult juggling these two worlds? What practical advice can you give them around how they should think and how they should be positioning themselves?
Well, first of all, one cannot legislate for integrity. I cannot, if I'm the president of South Africa with a cabinet, get the cabinet to agree to me that we pass a law from tomorrow, everyone in South Africa shall act honestly. Well, you cannot enforce that. And that's why the question of a director turning rogue, you cannot stop that by a code such as the King Code, nor can you stop it by legislation. I think there are two critical examples in the world. There's Sarbanes-Oxley, following the collapse in America, hasn't worked. And the Public Finance Management Act in South Africa hasn't worked. It hasn't worked to stop corruption in state-owned entities. And not only that, the extraordinary thing is that the first person to be charged publicly, anyway, that to my knowledge, was the Italian who was chief operating officer of the company in the Eastern Cape. And they were making corrupt payments to the prison department. And he gave evidence before Judge Zondo, and as he walked out the witness box, he was arrested and charged under the Public Finance Management Act. He's not a civil servant, he was a member of society, but they charged him under the Public Finance Management Act. So there have been no other public charges under the Public Finance Management Act. And in my judgment, it's actually fallen into disrepute. because I've argued with some ministers. If you take a basket and take the 700 odd state-owned entities, put in that basket those that have been run effectively with directors who acted truly as guardians of the company's assets and its business affairs and have created value in a sustainable manner. They named 7. I said, well, now let's look at the private sector. Let's forget about let's just take companies listed on the Johannesburg Stock Exchange. What companies can you nominate that you think have been acting inappropriately? Well, they've got 2 companies. So it demonstrates to you that if tomorrow you and I, Alex, were the president and the deputy president of South Africa and we abolished the Public Finance Management Act and just said that state-owned entities should follow the King principles or whatever legislation there is, but actually integrity, as I said, is the state of mind, the collective mind of the board. And the collective mind of the board should have gone offline before the board meeting, long before the board meeting, and decided what is the purpose of the business of the company. And the chair must make sure that everybody is making a contribution to making a decision in the long-term best interest of this incapacitated person that's so dependent on the body of directors individually and the board as a collective. And you can do that with principles. You don't need legislation. And when you have legislation, you cannot enforce it. You cannot enforce a state of mind to act in the long-term best interests of an individual. You cannot enforce that by legislation. Somebody turns rogue, he turns rogue, and there's nothing you can do about it. So I don't believe in legislating about these things, and I believe the board has to be a board that thinks that they're the heart, mind, and conscience of the company, this incapacitated person, which actually is the most important citizen in every country in the world, because it's through the limited liability company today that capital is raised and jobs are created.
Well, absolutely, amazing insights there, that you cannot legislate for integrity, that it must be principles-led. We need that principles-based approach. There may be instances where regulation is required, but legislation and regulation cannot take the lead. It is the principles that are the bedrock, the foundation, and everything else should stand on the back of those principles. Dr. Nxasana, what is your view on just what Professor King has just said? Any insights or inputs from you on these particular points, particularly when you consider again that you have these many leaders who are thinking around what does it mean? How do they implement it? What's your thinking?
Well, my view is that, I absolutely agree with Prof Mervyn King, because it is really what we do. And, the architecture and the construct of, if you just take South Africa as an example, I think we have to accept that we, having emerged from the apartheid system to the democratic order from 1994, have not addressed some of the fundamental issues that still existed under apartheid, for that matter. You see that in our everyday lives. So our constitution is founded on the principles of human rights and dignity, founded on the principles of equality. But actually, when you look at just our everyday lives, yes, we've made a lot of progress over the last 30 years plus, but we have to accept that we still have a long way to go as a country in addressing a whole lot of things, addressing the ownership of the economic patterns in our country, as an example. There's still a huge amount of inequality there. Addressing gender inequality, issues like gender-based violence. We're one of the worst countries in the world when it comes to this. Addressing inequality across the board when it comes to, particularly, I'm now involved in education, so working with young people. So a lot of those things are there. The unemployment, poverty, and inequality that we continue to face in our country, as well as in our continent, I might say, is something that has to be addressed. That's why, yes, we have this national dialogue, which is now, being planned for in the country. But even, as the preparations for this national dialogue are happening, discussions about how much it's going to cost and how that's going to, you can just see the lack of trust that civil society has on the process. Because once, hundreds of millions of rands are being bandied about, the immediate reaction of ordinary citizens that, well, who is on the take here? Who is going to benefit from this? So what may have started as an important idea of a national dialogue of what kind of country do we want? How do we address these issues and the ills that we face in our society? Suddenly turns into, well, people have just found an excuse, to use national dialogue to be on the take, to steal money. So we have a huge issue of lack of trust, and it's founded on what people see every day, where accountability is lacking, where we've had commissions upon commissions to address some of the issues that we have, including the Zondo Commission. But normal civil society, we are not aware of people that are in prison today, who were mentioned or were implicated in the Zondo Commission. And it's not the only commission. We've had a lot of commissions in this country. So it's lack of action, lack of accountability, lack of, people taking responsibility for the wrong actions that they have, which, leads us to this situation where, there's lack of trust, even where we may be trying to do the right things. I mean, the issue of values then becomes questioned, because people say, well, whose values are you talking about? Which values are you talking about? Because, if we have situations where leaders do not demonstrate their commitment to living the values that may be in the Constitution, that may be in documents, that may be in companies, reports and sustainability reports and so on, it really does undermine the very principles of, value-based society, value-based education, in our system.
That's such a powerful, listening to you, that's a powerful message. And I think it links to the earlier point that Professor King also talked about, the lack of accountability, the trust deficit. But before we move on to the next session, I'd be very keen there are many people on this platform. We have about close to 350 people that are listening. What is the call to action? With everything that, we've heard, what would be your individual message to people who've listened and see this lack of accountability, who see this trust deficit, who are in organizations potentially where they're seeing unethical conduct? What would be your parting message? Ownership message for people to own agency. I think it's important as the world moves that we do not feel like victims. But for each individual to feel that the locus of control, yes, there are factors outside, but there is the locus of control that's within. What would be your message to all of those that are listening to say, what role can I and should I play in promoting a values-led society? Professor King, maybe starting with you, and then Dr. Nxasana before I hand over to Carolyn.
Well, without even thinking about it, all of us, and I mean even those not online, all of us on planet Earth have a moral duty to endeavor to ensure that the planet that we leave is one that will allow sustainable development for those that come after us. We are transient caretakers. We don't own anything in this. I've got title deed to a property, but when I die, what happens to it? We transient. As humankind is a transient. And we've behaved disgustingly. We've polluted. We have destroyed natural assets. And what we're endeavoring to do now in this change of thinking from primacy to value is for the instrument, namely the limited liability company, to actually be the instrument in society to improve the general quality of life for people in society. So it's a huge duty that we carry as directors of a company. That the company, when you think about it, was created by society, for society, because government was the representative of the people in the United Kingdom, and then America and other countries followed. So it was created by society, for society. And companies have to make sure that they're going to come out with a year's activities, a bottom line, but a bottom line that is not subsidized by society and the environment. A bottom line where you've actually tried to improve the impact on society and the environment. And society and the environment has had a positive impact in turn on the company. So it's needed a change of thinking, and Carolyn knows that at the beginning of this month, I was given an award by Finance for the Future, a Lifetime Achievement Award, for changing the thinking of accountants about not just thinking about the financial statements, but thinking as a change maker of value creation for society, the company, this instrument, to create value for society generally. And if we get that thinking right in South Africa, we can start creating jobs for our young people. And we've got too much red tape in this country. And when I say you've got to cut red tape, I don't mean you've got to cut corners. But we've got to get rid of red tape. So that if you think our leaders, our directors in our state-owned entities, every day are spending about 60% of their time on conformance and not performance. Imagine just freeing their minds one day. And imagine that application of mind to performance. That's when you start creating jobs. That's when you start creating success. Not just ticking boxes mindlessly. It's got to be a mindful thing.
Thank you. Thank you. Dr. Nxasana, your concluding words?
Yeah, so I really do think that, often we always think that we must wait for government and maybe big business to do things. But actually it starts with us citizens, because each and every one of us has a role to play in promoting social justice, in promoting fairness, in practicing ethical values in our own homes and the spaces where we operate. So each and every one of us have a role to play in advocating for fairness and doing things that are going to support the marginalized. All of us, especially, a lot of people on this platform, I would categorize as privileged people. It doesn't matter that, it's not about money. We all are in privileged positions. And each and every one of us can do something to promote social justice, to promote fairness, to promote value-based citizenship. And it's something that all of us can do. So that's what I would say, that, you know, we mustn't wait for the national dialogue. We mustn't wait for government to do something. We mustn't wait for big business to do something. All of us have a responsibility in this regard.
Thank you. Thank you so much to our lovely and esteemed guests for those thought-provoking discussions. Carolyn, over to you to take us to the next session.
Thank you very much, Alex. Thank you so much to our speakers. I think Dr. Sizwe ended on the profound note. The call to action is for us, each and every one of us, to really live and to strive for this change that we're all wanting to see. No one has said no. Everybody's clapping and providing hearts. I think the call to action is for us. So Alex, it's no surprise that you are the stream lead for sustainable development, because it's this activity and this action that leads to sustainability, sustainable organizations, sustainable government, sustainable well-being in the country and through the G20 in our world today. So thank you very much, Alex, for moderating this session. And the poll results are available on the event page. Straight after the event, a podcast-style summary will be available together with the Q&A. We won't have time to go through all the questions and answers. Thank you so much for putting them in. We will capture them and make them available on the event page. And we'll also have, of course, the recording available on the event page. But I'd like to hand over now to Dr. Dyer, to Priya Dyer, who is the co-chair of the V20 in South Africa's hosting the G20, so also V20 South Africa. So Dr. Dyer, over to you. Thank you.
Carolyn, thank you. And thank you to all our panelists. This has been a very useful conversation. I think what really is important for Values 20 to highlight is that the issue of living values is a human issue. You know, so today we've spoken a lot about institutions and organizations and what's going wrong and how it's resulting in the situation we are in right now. And that's correct. But this fundamentally starts, you know, as Dr. Nxasana was saying to us, this is an issue of you and me. And I think this is a very big disconnect that we face as humans. We often, when we talk about the issues of values, it's an intellectual construct. But in fact, this is a behavioral issue. Who are you being? Who am I being? How are we enabling the society that we want to create? And, you know, so Carolyn didn't mention in my intro is that, you know, I've been teaching at business schools, most recently at the University of Cape Town's Graduate School of Business. And one of the biggest struggles that I have in the classroom is not issues around these conversations that we're having, around what are the societal issues. The issue is around leadership. It's about ownership. How am I shifting my behavior? How do I take accountability for the things that I do? How do I treat other people? How do I show up? How do I engage? And so Values 20 South Africa, our motto and our goal is both the verb and the noun of living values. Because as we collectively live values, we create a society within which values are prevalent. So I ask you and I invite you for your support of Values 20 South Africa. We are, you know, a stream of the G20. We are going to continue our work over the next 3 years. Our intention is to drive living values in our society. This year, our focus is on creating awareness. How we are doing this is like all the other G20 areas, engagement groups. We have a research communique that we are creating. We also have a huge advocacy component. Alex is one of them. Alex is leading our sustainability stream. And so what we are aiming to do is saying, right, what are the policy recommendations that are coming about in terms of how do we live values in our society? And then our advocacy partners are going to look and see how we implement those recommendations. So we embed that change and we anchor that change institutionally. So that's how the organization aims to run over the next few years. This year, as I said, our focus is on awareness, and we need your partnership in this regard, right? So awareness is created, firstly, at this level. How am I showing up? Have I acknowledged somebody? Have I acknowledged the homeless person I just drove past that was looking for money? Have I seen that person? Have I seen that human? As I'm walking in a mall, do I see you, or are you invisible to me? As we're sitting in a meeting, who do we hear and when do we zone out? All of that is our living value. We say, I value inclusion. Many people say, I value inclusion, but when it comes to actually sitting in a meeting, there are some people who receive preferential hearing or preferential listening. So many different ways for us to contribute. Please do reach out to us. You can link to me on LinkedIn, or you can look at our Values 20 group LinkedIn page. You can link into us. You can also contact Alex over here, and we will connect you to the right stream, right? So we have a research team, we have an advocacy team. We also, please, need funding to go forward. We need the funding of a secretariat. I would be really remiss of me to mention that. So I'm in a group of finance people. So people, it would be wonderful if you could help us in any way, shape, or form with ensuring that we have the infrastructure to drive this behaviorally, to anchor this behaviorally so that we can drive the kind of society we want. Thank you, community, for your participation, for your involvement, for showing up, and for being a values-based leader, and for your intention to be a values-based leader. Carolyn, over to you now. Thank you, community. Thank you, panelists.
Thank you so much, Dr. Dyer. And there are lots of questions here about how to participate. What guidance can you give to the attendees on how they can participate?
So there are many different ways. The first of which is, I think what we will do in the coming weeks is we will announce some information sessions about what Values 20 is about. And I think once you know what Values 20 is about and what we're trying to accomplish, you can then understand which area you could slot into support. Living values, very simply, what we are trying to do is create an awareness of values. We have selected key values that we are focusing on, the issues of dignity, Ubuntu, integrity and ethical governance, equity, agency, and accountability. These are the core areas of the core chosen values that we are choosing to focus on. So we are simply looking to create awareness of those values and create dialogue on that, because once we dialogue, we create awareness.
That's it.
Right?
Thank
and
you.
The awareness is the start of the change, because we can't say, how do we become a leader when we ourselves don't identify the behavior within ourselves? So the very first step of anchoring behavior change in our society is being aware. And so we're starting this year with awareness. We will announce more events on our website, just some more information sessions. And so please do keep an eye out for that. And in the meantime, please drop us drop me a message on LinkedIn, and I will ensure that you are linked into the right person. Thank you. Thank you, everyone.
Fabulous. Thank you. Thank you, everyone, for joining us today for another Good Governance Academy event. Thank you to our panelists and speakers, and safe travels to Prof Mohale in the skies. But thank you very much to everybody for joining us today.